You know, in the book of Revelation, there's this incredible, dramatic war in heaven, a huge cosmic battle where Satan finally gets cast out. But the million-dollar question has always been, when does this actually happen? For centuries, this has been a massive debate. So today, we're diving into one really fascinating interpretation that pieces all the clues together to offer a very specific timeline.
So what's the big mystery we're trying to solve here? Well, Revelation 12 paints this picture of Michael and his angels throwing the dragon, Satan, down to earth. But was this something that happened in the distant, primordial past? Or maybe at the time of Christ? Or is it an event that's still to come? And trust me, the answer to that completely changes how we look at all the prophecies about the end times.
All right, to get to the bottom of this, we're going to follow the exact investigative path laid out in our source material. We'll start with the war itself, then we'll lock in a key rule for how we interpret the timeline. And then, kind of like detectives, we'll start eliminating the theories that just don't fit the evidence until we land on the final, compelling conclusion. So let's jump right in. Okay, first things first, let's set the scene. Our whole investigation really centers on this incredibly dramatic vision of war in Revelation chapter 12. It's an event that builds up to Satan's total, forceful expulsion from the heavenly realm.
You can really feel the finality in that language, right? He was cast to the earth. It sounds like a single, decisive moment. But, and here's the problem, the text doesn't give us a calendar date. It's this ambiguity that has opened the door to so many different interpretations, which is why figuring out when this happens is so critical to understanding everything that comes next.
Now, before we can even start to analyze any of the theories out there, our source material establishes one critical ground rule. The timeline in Revelation is packed with specific numbers, and how we interpret one number in particular, the 1260 days, is going to shape our entire conclusion.
So the debate really boils down to this. Are those 1260 days a literal 3.5 years, or are they a symbol for 1260 times years? The year theory, often gets tied to a long stretch of church history. But the day theory sees it as a very specific, super intense period of a final global crisis, what many call the Great Tribulation.
Our source here comes down hard against the year theory. I mean, think about it. The argument is that if it were 1260 years, then prophecies like the Mark of the Beast would have had to be active for centuries, and that just doesn't line up with history. Plus, the Bible says that after Satan is thrown down, he only has a short time. Well, 1260 years is hardly a short time, right? So, for the rest of this explainer, we are operating on a literal 3.5-year timeline. That's the key.
All right, so using that 3.5-year time frame as our guide, let's start a process of elimination. We're about to see how the author just systematically takes apart some of the most common theories about when this war in heaven actually went down.
First up is a really popular one. It's the idea that this war happened in the ancient primordial past, way before Adam and Eve ever walked the earth. The classic story of a rebellion among the angels in heaven.
But, and this is a huge but, the author points to a massive problem with this theory, and it's right there in the text. Verse 11 says the accuser is overcome by two things, the blood of the Lamb, that's Christ's sacrifice, and the word of their testimony, that's the martyrs. Well, neither of those things even existed before humanity. This verse ties Satan's expulsion directly to events that happen here on earth, not in some pre-human past.
Okay, so if it wasn't before creation, what about at that huge turning point in history, Christ's victory on the cross? Or maybe at Pentecost when the church was born? This theory suggests that Jesus' triumph on the cross immediately resulted in Satan getting the boot from heaven. Makes sense on the surface.
But again, the author argues the timeline just doesn't fit, and the key piece of evidence comes from the fifth seal in Revelation 6. In that vision, which happens after Christ has already ascended to heaven, the souls of martyrs are literally told to wait until their full number is complete. This is pretty clear proof that the key condition for kicking Satan out, the full testimony of the martyrs, hadn't been met yet.
So, we've dismissed theories that place the war in the distant past, and we've ruled out the time of Christ. This means our investigation now has to zoom in on the only period left, the final Great Tribulation itself.
This brings us to a really common interpretation, the idea that Satan gets thrown down right in the middle of that final 3.5-year period. In this view, his fall is what triggers the second, even more intense half of all the persecution. But does this theory really hold up under a microscope?
Well, according to our source, this theory creates a major logical paradox.
It's kind of like a chicken and egg problem. See, the Bible promises that the martyrs who refuse to worship the beast get to be part of the first resurrection, a huge deal for believers. But if the beast's reign only starts halfway through the tribulation, how could anyone possibly be martyred for refusing to worship him in the first half? It just doesn't add up. It strongly suggests the beast has to be in power from the very beginning, which means Satan has to have already been cast down to give him that power.
So, after this whole process of elimination, the author finally arrives at a conclusion, a very specific sequence of events that they believe brilliantly resolves all of these contradictions by connecting the dots between different parts of Revelation.
And here it is, the big conclusion. The war in heaven isn't an event that happens during the tribulation. It's the actual trigger that kicks the whole thing off. It's literally the starting gun for the final 3.5 years of chaos on Earth.
And the author ties this massive pivotal event to one specific moment we've actually already mentioned, the opening of the fifth seal.
Remember those martyrs under the altar from the fifth seal? The ones crying out for justice? Well, our source identifies that as the key trigger. That moment of mass martyrdom is when the full number of witnesses is nearly complete. Their testimony, sealed in their own blood, provides that, you could say, legal justification in the heavenly court for Michael to finally make his move and expel the great accuser for good.
So here's the proposed timeline. First, the fifth seal opens, which represents a time of intense martyrdom that almost completes that required number. This then triggers the war in heaven, and boom! Satan is cast down. He's filled with rage because he knows his time is short, so he immediately empowers the beast. And that is what kicks off the 1260-day tribulation. You see how this sequence solves that paradox? The beast is active from day one, which allows for martyrs throughout the entire period.
This verse basically becomes the linchpin for the entire argument. It's not just a statement of what's happening. It's a statement of cause and effect. Woe to the earth because the devil has gone down to you. His fall is the direct cause of the tribulation that follows, and it's all driven by his fury that he knows his end is just around the corner.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the main argument from our source material. The whole key to this puzzle is seeing Satan's fall not as some ancient historical event, but as a future one. It's triggered by the testimony of the martyrs, which is symbolized by the fifth seal, and his expulsion from heaven is the very act that unleashes the beast and kicks off that final, literal 3.5-year tribulation. And this, of course, brings us to our final and pretty provocative question. If this sequence is actually correct, if a great martyrdom really has to happen before that final tribulation can begin, it kind of forces us to look at world events not just as history, but as potential pieces of a much larger unfolding prophetic drama. It really gives you a whole new framework for looking at the world and for thinking about what might still be to come.